The sun clawed at the peaks of the Rockies, bleeding across the sky in thick, ominous crimson as I, David, a hunter born and bred in these mountains, dragged myself home. Usually my stride was confident, honed by years of traversing forest trails. But today my legs tangled beneath me as if I'd never set foot in these ancient woods. My hands, calloused and steady from years of handling my trusty old Winchester, trembled so violently the rifle felt like an impossibly heavy lead bar. Each labored breath burned my lungs, not from exhaustion, but from a primal, clinging fear that coated my insides. My gaze darted constantly to the forest's edge, that dark, malevolent line separating my cozy home, my small island of safety, from the wild, untamed wilderness that had, today, shown me its true, nightmarish face. My wife, Sarah, was already standing on the porch, her silhouette softly outlined by the warm light spilling from the kitchen window. From inside, muffled voices drifted out. She was humming something, and our 7-year-old son, Timmy, seemed to be telling her about his daily adventures. That domestic, peaceful sound always warmed my soul, but today it only heightened the contrast with the horror I'd just endured. Sarah immediately noticed my state. Her smile vanished, her face drawn. "David, what happened? My God, you're pale. Are you hurt?" Her voice trembled with worry. I tried to wave her off, to force out something reassuring, but the words caught in my throat. Everything's fine, honey. Just caught myself on a branch, that's all. Tore my jacket, I mumbled, pointing to the tattered sleeve of my old canvas jacket. A lie. There wasn't a scratch on my shoulder, but the fabric was shredded as if ripped by enormous, inhuman claws. Stepping inside, I went straight to the sink. My hands beneath the nails were caked with dirt and some sticky, dark residue. It wasn't my blood. I scrubbed my hands raw, but the sensation of that foul substance wouldn't go away. Looking up, I saw a stranger's face in the mirror, twisted with terror. My face. My stubble, usually rugged, now looked disheveled. And my eyes. My eyes were wide, like a cornered animal's. The recent events replayed in my mind again and again like a broken record. The deep, shadowy forest, where I'd ventured further than usual. A strange, guttural growl, unlike a bear's rumble, a wolf's howl, or a cougar's snarl. It seemed to emanate from the very earth, vibrating the air around me. And then, a huge, dark figure flickering between the trunks of ancient pines. It moved with unnatural, terrifying speed, not with animalistic grace, but in jerks, like a monstrously large, poorly oiled machine, yet incredibly fast. I remember how instinct, honed by decades of hunting, made me raise my rifle. My heart hammered in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribs. I aimed at the blurred silhouette, at the point from which that chilling growl had come. A shot. The roar shattered the forest silence, followed almost immediately by a piercing, high-pitched shriek, more like a distorted human cry of pain than an animal's death throes. I saw the creature lurch, saw a dark, wet stain spread across its dark fur. Or was it skin? I hit it. I was sure I hit it. And badly. The beast, letting out another menacing, gurgling sound that made the hairs on my neck stand on end, darted into the undergrowth with such speed I barely had time to blink. It left behind only thick branches snapped like matchsticks and a strange, suffocating odor, a mixture of musk, rot, and something else that turned my stomach. For the first time in my life, I, David, who knew this forest like the back of my hand, felt like a pathetic, defenseless victim, not a predator. Neither my tracking skills nor my hunter's pride could keep me rooted to the spot. Primal, animalistic fear drove me away. I stumbled, fell heedless of the path, ignoring branches whipping my face. I ran until my lungs burned, until black spots swam before my eyes, until finally the comforting warm lights of my home pierced through the trees. Now, at dinner, I couldn't swallow a bite. The mashed potatoes Timmy loved so much, and the savory stew Sarah had cooked, tasted like ash. Every rustle outside the window, every crackle of logs in the fireplace, made me jump and clench my fork convulsively. I imagined eyes watching me from the dark forest that surrounded our house on all sides. Yellow eyes, burning with a hungry, inhuman fire, boring into my back through the thin window pane. I couldn't tell Sarah the truth. She'd think I'd gone mad, or that some old rogue bear had scared me to death. But it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a wolf. It was something else. Something for which there is no name in human language. Going to bed, I placed my loaded rifle beside the bed within arm's reach. All night I listened to every sound from the night forest. The familiar hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind in the treetops, the distant yelp of a fox. All of it sounded different now, harboring a hidden threat. I tried to distinguish that same guttural growl in this nocturnal symphony, but the forest was silent, guarding its terrible secret. Sarah, sensing my tension, held me, tried to soothe me with quiet, tender words, but her voice drowned in my growing, soul-chilling premonition of inevitable doom. I knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. 3 a.m. My eyelids drooped from exhaustion, but sleep wouldn't come. Every nerve was stretched to its breaking point. I lay staring at the ceiling where bizarre shadows danced from the moonlight filtering through the gaps in the blinds. Every casual sound, a creak of floorboards upstairs, the distant hum of a car on the highway, seemed a harbinger of something dreadful. Then I heard it. A distinct crunch of dry leaves right beneath our bedroom window. It wasn't a random noise caused by a night breeze or a scurrying raccoon. This sound was deliberate, heavy. I held my breath. My heart skipped a beat, then hammered with double the force. Silence. And again, a crunch. This time even closer, as if something huge and clumsy was creeping along the side of the house, carefully testing the ground underfoot. Sarah and Timmy slept beside me, their steady, peaceful breathing seeming so fragile, so vulnerable amidst the looming, unspeakable horror. Silently, as befits a hunter with years of experience, I slipped out of bed. The old oak floorboards creaked betrayingly under my bare feet, and the sound seemed deafening in the night silence. Holding my breath, I tiptoed to the window. Carefully, I eased back a corner of the curtain. The moonlight, bright and cold, flooded our small yard, casting distorted, sinister shadows from the trees and bushes. Nothing. Only the play of light and shadow, creating the illusion of movement where there was none. But the oppressive feeling of an unseen presence didn't leave me. It literally pressed down on my chest, making my blood run cold. I moved slowly, trying to step as quietly as possible into the living room. The window here faced the other side of the house, looking out onto the overgrown drive leading to the old shed. And there I saw it. A huge, shapeless shadow moved slowly, almost lazily, along the house wall, then stopped right at the front door. It was too tall for a man, even the tallest, and too massive for any animal I knew. My heart seemed to plummet to my feet, and my mouth went instantly dry. I darted to the wall where my trusty rifle hung on a deer rack. With trembling, clumsy hands, I ripped it down, checked the round in the chamber. A flashlight. I needed a flashlight. I fumbled for it on the mantelpiece, heavy metallic with a powerful beam. Holding my breath, I cautiously, millimeter by millimeter, eased open the front door, having already unlatched it to prevent any squeak. Outside it was silent, only a light night breeze rustling the leaves of the old maple by the porch. I poked my head out, sweeping the flashlight beam across the yard. Empty. The shadow had vanished. But I knew where it might have gone. Towards the woods to the old abandoned logging road that began just 100 yards from our house. Without a second's hesitation, driven by a mix of fear and desperate resolve, I stepped over the threshold. It was that creature. I had no doubt. I had to make sure it was gone, had to drive it far away from my home, from my family. I walked several dozen yards, then more. The dark silhouette seemed to play with me, flickering between the trees, luring me further and further from the comforting lights of home, deeper into the inky darkness of the forest. I had probably gone a good 100 yards when screams tore through the night. Piercing, soul-chilling, full of inhuman terror. It was Sarah screaming, and instantly, almost merging with her cry, came a child's wail, high-pitched, desperate, full of such despair that my insides plummeted. Timmy's cry. It cut off just as suddenly on its highest, most heart-rending note. I froze in place as if struck by lightning. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer, knocking the air from my lungs. It was a trap. The creature had distracted me, lured me from the house, so it could. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled backward. Branches whipped my face, leaving bloody scratches. Tree roots snagged my feet, but I felt no pain, noticed nothing but those terrible, fading screams in the distance. Bursting into the house, I saw a scene that would forever burn itself into my soul, turning it to ash. The living room was drenched in blood. It was everywhere, on the walls, on the ceiling, on the scattered, broken furniture. And on the floor, amidst the wreckage of our cozy world, lay the mangled, disfigured bodies of Sarah and little Timmy. Words cannot describe this nightmare, this hell on earth. In the corner of the room, for one horrifying instant, I saw it, that same dark, monstrous figure. It stood swaying slightly, watching me with its unblinking yellow eyes burning with inhuman fire. From its enormous, fanged maw, thick, dark blood dripped heavily onto the floor. My blood. My family's blood. A primal, all-consuming rage surged through me, displacing shock, grief, and numbness. I raised my rifle and, without aiming, unleashed a volley of fire at that spawn of hell. Bullets slammed into the creature with a shriek, tearing off chunks of dark fur and flesh. But it, with a short, furious growl, darted towards the shattered window with incredible, impossible speed for such a massive body, and slipped out, vanishing into the darkness of the forest, which was its salvation. Bullets tore through wallpaper, chipped plaster from the walls, splintered the window frame, but the creature was gone, unharmed. I collapsed to my knees amidst that bloody mess, amidst the bodies of my loved ones, and my scream, a scream of despair, hatred, and impotence, merged with the mournful howl of the wind that gusted through the shattered house. I had lost everything that mattered to me in this world. The arrival of the police felt like a nightmare playing out in sickening slow motion. Cruiser lights pulsed, painting the yard in a deathly blue. Uniformed deputies moved with an unsettling efficiency, their cameras clicking, documenting the unspeakable horror within my home. Sheriff Henderson, an old hunting buddy, looked as shell-shocked as I felt. His usually gruff, weather-beaten face was ashen, his eyes wide with genuine horror. The official narrative, later parroted by the pathologist and a forensics team, chalked it up to a wild animal attack, maybe a rogue, starving bear, or an unusually large, aggressive wolf pack. I tried to tell them the truth, to describe what I'd seen, the inhuman silhouette, its horrifying eyes, its incredible speed and strength. But my words sounded like the ravings of a madman, driven insane by grief. They nodded sympathetically, clapped me on the shoulder, but in their eyes, I read only pity and disbelief. The crime scene investigation revealed enormous tracks around the house, unlike those of any known animal in these parts, but they were quickly dismissed as distortions caused by a witness's panic or something else that didn't fit the official investigation. The funeral. 2 small velvet-draped coffins. The empty, cold earth, greedily accepting what was dearest to me in the world. I stood like a stone statue, feeling neither the icy wind nor the sympathetic glances of the few neighbors. Inside me was a scorched wasteland, leaving no room for tears or words. After the funeral, I lost myself. Days blurred into a single, endless, drawn-out nightmare, generously doused with cheap whiskey from the nearest roadside liquor store. I abandoned our ruined, desecrated home. I slept wherever I could, in my old pickup, under the open sky, sometimes like a sleepwalker, returning to the ashes of my past life to relive that terrible night over and over, to the point of nausea. Sometimes, guided by the remnants of a fading hunting instinct, I'd take my rifle and go into the forest, wandering aimlessly along familiar trails. But I found no trace of the beast, not the slightest hint of its presence. The forest was silent, ominously guarding its terrible secret. One morning, looking at my swollen face, overgrown with a weak stubble, in the smudged rearview mirror of my truck, I felt something inside me break. Instead of dull, all-consuming pain, a cold, focused rage emerged. I made myself a silent, unbreakable vow. I would find this creature. I would track it down, no matter the cost. And I would have my revenge. This thought became the sole purpose of my miserable existence, the only flicker of light remaining in my scorched soul. I began digging through local archives, sifting through yellowed newspaper pages, poring over dusty library binders, and I found things. Fragmented reports, strange coincidences, several cases of unsolved, unusually brutal murders in the vicinity of our town and neighboring counties over the past 100, even 200 years. Mysterious disappearances of people, tourists, hunters, loggers, who were never found. Frighteningly similar testimonies from the few witnesses who, at the time, had been dismissed as crazy or simply drunk. Again and again, there were mentions of a devil beast, a forest demon, a howling terror from the thicket. The threads of my improvised investigation, woven from fear, despair, and a thirst for revenge, led me to a nearby Ute Indian reservation. I had often heard from old hunters that the elders of this tribe preserved ancient knowledge about the forest and its mysterious inhabitants, knowledge inaccessible to white people. After long inquiries and some initial distrust from the locals, I finally managed to meet with an elder named Old Man Stone Bear. He was a very old, wizened Indian, like an ancient tree, with a face etched with deep wrinkles like a map of his lived years. But his eyes, dark and deep, looked at me with astonishing clarity and piercing wisdom. Old Man Stone Bear listened to my rambling account, filled with pain and rage, with an inscrutable, stony face, not interrupting, only nodding slowly now and then. Then, after a long, heavy silence, he spoke. His voice was quiet but weighty, each word echoing in my mind. He said that the forests around us were ancient, that they had witnessed the turning of ages and held many secrets that we, the pale-faced newcomers, couldn't even imagine. In these forests lived not only ordinary animals but also spirits, ancient entities, some of whom could take physical material form. What I described, the huge dark silhouette, the unnatural speed, the guttural growl, the thirst for blood, was very similar to a creature from their ancient legends, a Wendigo, or something very close to it, perhaps altered by time and the influence of this specific place. The elder said that by wounding this creature during our first encounter, I hadn't just inflicted a physical wound. I had awakened a special blind rage within it. I had trespassed on its territory, which it acutely sensed after our clash, and it had come to seek revenge, not just for the wound, but for my very presence, for disrupting the ancient, fragile balance. But I didn't attack first, I protested, feeling a wave of despair rise in me again. I was defending myself. I was just hunting in the forest as always, as my father and grandfather did. But Old Man Stone Bear only shook his head slowly. For these creatures there is no difference between right and wrong, he said. Their logic is different, inhuman. What matters is only that the balance was disturbed. Your shot was a stone thrown into a sleeping lake, and the ripples will spread for a long, long time. Despite his initial, understandable reluctance to help a white man, a representative of the people who had brought so much sorrow to his ancestors, the elder seemed to see the depth of my grief and the unbreakable resolve in my eyes. He understood that I wouldn't give up. And perhaps he also understood that this creature, having tasted human blood so close to settlements, wouldn't stop and could bring even more misery to his people. Finally, Old Man Stone Bear agreed to help. But he immediately warned me that the path ahead would be incredibly dangerous, and he could give no guarantees of success. He told me about an ancient ritual their ancestors sometimes used to track particularly dangerous or elusive forest spirits. The ritual was called the Call of Blood. I was to catch a live rabbit. Then at sunset, at a strictly specified spot by a stream, which the elder would describe in detail, I was to make a circle on the ground with 13 smooth river stones. Place the rabbit in the center of this circle and sacrifice it, spilling its blood onto the ground within the circle. After that, closing my eyes, I had to concentrate fully on the image of the beast I was hunting, on my hatred for it, on my insatiable thirst for revenge. If the spirits of this forest were favorable to me, and if my will and concentration were strong enough, I would be given a sign, a trail, a bloody trail leading directly to the creature's lair. Returning from the reservation, I felt a strange surge of strength, albeit a grim one, colored by bitterness and the anticipation of danger. Old Man Stone Bear's words had ignited a spark of hope within me, however faint. I was no longer a blind kitten fumbling in the dark. I had a path, a purpose. I emptied my meager savings, which I kept for a rainy day in an old cookie tin. At the only gun store in our town, I bought everything I might need. Ammunition. Lots of ammunition. But for special rounds, I went to Old Silas, a reclusive gunsmith out past the county line. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. He just nodded when I asked for custom-loaded 12-gauge shells packed with real silver shavings. One of the old folklore texts I dug up in the dusty archives of the county library vaguely mentioned that such creatures were vulnerable to silver. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. I also bought a new, powerful hunting knife with a Damascus steel blade, capable, the salesman assured me, of cutting through a young oak. Supplies of jerky, hardtack, and canned goods, everything that could be useful on a long trek. Medical supplies, strong painkillers, bandages, a tourniquet, antiseptics, a new, even more powerful LED flashlight with several spare battery packs, a compass, and a detailed map of the forest expanse which stretched for many miles around. Back in my pickup, which had become my temporary home, I meticulously cleaned and oiled my trusty Winchester rifle and Remington pump-action shotgun until they gleamed. I checked every item of my meager gear. This was no longer just the hunting I was accustomed to since childhood. This was war. A personal war in which I could not afford to lose. More than my own life was at stake. The memory of Sarah and Timmy, and my own ravaged soul. Following Old Man Stone Bear's precise instructions, I plunged deeper into the forest. The spot by the stream he described was several miles north of my ruined home, in a rather secluded, overgrown, and swampy part of the woods where few humans ever trod. The forest here seemed older, the trees taller and more massive, and the shadows beneath their dense canopies thicker and darker. The air was damp and heavy, smelling of wet earth and decaying leaves. I constantly felt an unseen gaze upon me, but now it didn't cause panic as before. On the contrary, it only strengthened my grim resolve. "I'm coming for you, you bastard," I thought, gripping my rifle stock. There were still several hours until sunset. Using my old hunting skills, I quickly set up a few simple fishing line snares on the barely visible rabbit trails that wound near the stream. Then I settled in, patiently waiting. Time dragged on excruciatingly slowly. After about an hour, I heard a faint squeal and rustle in the bushes. A fairly large gray rabbit had blundered into one of my snares. Its small body thrashed desperately in the loop, its eyes bulging with terror. I carefully removed it, feeling its tiny heart pound furiously in my palms. For a moment, a pang of pity pricked me. An innocent creature had to die for my revenge. But I quickly suppressed the feeling. This was a necessary sacrifice, a price I had to pay. In a small, moss-covered clearing by the edge of the gurgling stream, just as the sun began to slowly dip towards the horizon, painting the treetops in golden crimson hues, I found 13 smooth, rounded stones, washed clean by the water. Precisely following the elder's instructions, I arranged them on the ground in a circle about 3 feet in diameter. The place was filled with a peculiar, almost tangible silence, broken only by the monotonous gurgle of water hitting the stones and the rare rustle of leaves in the wind. The sun had almost touched the tops of the tallest trees, plunging the clearing into deep, purple twilight. It was time. I placed the struggling rabbit in the center of the stone circle. I drew my new hunting knife. The blade gleamed coldly in the last rays of the setting sun. With one precise, swift practice movement, I slit the rabbit's throat. Warm, almost hot blood spurted onto my hands and heavily stained the earth and stones within the ritual circle. I squeezed my eyes shut, pushing away unwanted images. With my eyes closed, I concentrated completely. I summoned the hateful image of the creature to my mind, its yellow eyes burning with fire, its fanged maw smeared with blood. The mangled, lifeless bodies of Sarah and Timmy. Rage, unbearable pain, all-consuming hatred, a burning thirst for revenge. All these emotions, black as pitch, I poured into a silent, desperate call, aimed deep into the dark, ancient forest. At some point, it seemed to me that the air around me thickened, became heavier, denser, like water. The whisper of the wind in the branches changed, taking on new, unsettling inflections. I imagined distant, unclear voices, whether moans or wails. My skin prickled with goosebumps, even though the evening was quite warm. I felt an unseen, powerful, ancient presence, as if the forest itself, its very soul, had answered my call, my sacrifice. This sensation simultaneously filled me with trembling fear and gave me a strange, grim certainty. The ritual had worked. When I finally opened my eyes, the sun had almost completely vanished below the horizon, plunging the forest into thick, impenetrable twilight. The circle of stones seemed undisturbed. The rabbit's blood had soaked into the earth, leaving only dark stains. But next to the circle, on the damp, loose soil, I saw it. A distinct, small but deep imprint. It wasn't like any animal track I knew, and it seemed to glow with a faint, barely perceptible reddish light, as if it had been made of freshly congealed blood. This track, singular but so distinct, led into the deepest part of the forest, where the darkness was particularly dense. Without a second's hesitation, I raised my rifle, turned on my flashlight, and stepped onto that bloody sign. The hunt had begun. I followed the barely visible bloody trail, which sometimes clearly showed on the damp forest floor of fallen needles and leaves, and sometimes almost completely vanished on stretches covered with thick moss or rocks. The moonlight, filtering through the dense canopy of ancient trees, was weak and unreliable, so the beam of my powerful flashlight became my primary guide in this darkness-shrouded world. The forest around me grew wilder, untrodden, more primeval. There were no paths here whatsoever. I waded through cold, gurgling streams, the water reaching my knees, pushed through thick, thorny thickets of wild raspberries and rose hips that tore my clothes and scratched my skin, bypassed enormous storm-felled trees that blocked the path like fallen giants. Every rustle, every snap of a twig made me freeze in place and listen intently to the night sounds, ready to raise my rifle at any second. After about 3 or 4 hours of agonizing wandering through this infernal labyrinth, when my strength was already waning, the bloody trail I had so diligently tracked suddenly ended at the base of a low but steep rock outcrop, overgrown with tenacious ivy. I circled the spot several times, meticulously examining every inch of ground, but the trail had vanished, as if dissolved into thin air. Disappointment and anger surged through me. Had the ritual failed? Was I left with nothing again? I was about to punch the cold stone in despair when my gaze suddenly caught something else. On the soft, muddy soil near a small stream flowing from beneath the rock, I noticed an enormous, deeply impressed footprint. It vaguely resembled a human foot, but it was 3, if not 4 times larger. Its length was at least 18 inches, and its width about 7. The toes were short and thick, and the arch of the foot was flat. My blood ran cold. Legends of Sasquatch or Bigfoot had always circulated among local hunters and loggers, but I, like most, had been skeptical, dismissing them as mere campfire tales for tourists. But this track, it was too real, too clear. Did these mythical creatures truly inhabit these remote forests? The thought made my heart pound even faster. It was one thing to hunt a bloodthirsty werewolf, however horrifying, and quite another to encounter another unknown, powerful, and potentially hostile force. Continuing with doubled, if not tripled, caution, I soon found other, even more disturbing signs of Bigfoot's presence. Huge branches, as thick as my leg, were broken off trees at a height of at least 10 to 12 feet above the ground, a height no human, nor even the largest bear, could reach. In one spot, I came across strange, crudely woven structures made of young, flexible trees, resembling primitive shelters, or more likely some kind of screens covering the entrance to a shallow cave. The air here was literally saturated with a strong, heavy, musky odor, simultaneously reminiscent of wet dog, decaying leaves, and something else, unfamiliar and unpleasant. I finally understood that I had entered the territory of these creatures. I was an uninvited guest here. Moving along the edge of a thick, almost impenetrable growth of young fir trees, I suddenly felt a heavy, piercing gaze upon me. It was the kind of feeling you get when a large predator is watching you, and self-preservation instincts scream danger. I froze, afraid to move. Slowly turning my head, I began to scan the slope of the nearest hill, thickly covered with old, tall pines, and I saw it. Among the trees, almost blending with the shadows, stood a massive, dark silhouette, significantly taller than a human. At least 8 feet, no less. The creature stood utterly motionless, like a statue, simply observing me. It wasn't the werewolf, I immediately realized. Its outline was different, more humanoid, but at the same time incredibly powerful. It was him, the lord of this part of the forest. My finger instinctively rested on the rifle's trigger, but I immediately forced myself to lower the weapon, barrel pointed down, showing that I sought no conflict, that I posed no threat. Meeting Bigfoot face to face, let alone confronting it, was absolutely not part of my plan. My sole objective was the werewolf, the creature that had stripped me of everything. Slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements, I began to retreat, circling the supposed encampment of these creatures, moving further and further away from where I'd seen the silhouette. It followed me with its heavy gaze, but did not move, did not make a sound. I felt a strange mixture of primal fear and a kind of reverent awe before this ancient, mighty being. I clearly understood that I was merely a tiny, insignificant speck, accidentally blown by the wind into this ancient, harsh world, living by its own incomprehensible laws. As I walked on, I couldn't shake the thoughts of what I had just witnessed. The forest, which I considered my second home, turned out to be far more populated and dangerous than I had ever imagined. If Bigfoots were real, what else could be hiding in these impassable thickets, in these dark, damp ravines? This thought simultaneously terrified me to my core and, strangely enough, strengthened my resolve to deal with the creature that had so cruelly and mercilessly destroyed my life. I had to be even more careful, even more vigilant. The cost of error was now too high. After some time, having made a considerable detour and bypassed, as I thought, the Bigfoot territory, I again came across tracks. Barely visible, but different now. These were not huge bare footprints, but deep claw marks on the ground, clumps of dark, almost black fur caught on thorny bushes. These were the tracks of my enemy. I was back on the right path. The forest around me grew darker, the air heavier and colder, and the silence more ominous. I felt myself drawing closer to my goal. I had been following the trail for hours, maybe an eternity. Time had lost all meaning for me, dissolving into the monotonous rhythm of steps, scanning the ground, and tense anticipation. The forest grew denser, almost impenetrable. Sunlight barely pierced through. Even in the daytime, a suffocating greenish gloom prevailed, as if I had descended to the bottom of a deep, dark lake. The trees were ancient, gnarled, covered in gray lichens, their mighty knotted branches intertwined high overhead, forming a dense, oppressive canopy through which only tiny patches of leaden gray sky were visible. The air was damp and cold, smelling of decay, mushrooms, and something else, barely perceptible but sickeningly foul, that made my throat tickle and my stomach churn. As I pushed deeper into this accursed wilderness, I found more and more horrifying evidence of the werewolf's presence and bloody activity. At first, it was just gnawed animal bones, deer, elk, even a bear, judging by the size of the skull. But then I started finding human remains. An old, chewed-on femur, bleached white among last year's leaves. A skull fragment with a few preserved long, matted hairs. These discoveries chilled my blood and made my heart clench with horror and rage. Tracks of huge, razor-sharp claws were everywhere, on tree trunks, on uprooted stumps, on massive boulders. Some of them were left as if the creature, in a fit of blind fury, had torn and smashed everything around. The further I went, the stronger became the oppressive feeling of pure, concentrated evil emanating, it seemed, from the very earth, from every tree, from every stone. Suddenly I stumbled upon a small clearing overgrown with tall, withered grass. Among the grass, the pathetic remnants of an old campsite were visible. A torn, faded piece of canvas tent, forlornly sticking out of the ground, a rusty, hold-through cooking pot, several scattered and crushed tin cans. And next to these signs of days long past, fresh, horrifying evidence of a recent tragedy. Crushed grass, stained dark brownish, already dried spots on the ground and on the bark of nearby trees. Signs of a desperate struggle. I realized that here very recently the creature had feasted, and its victim was again a human. The tracks, now clearer and more numerous, led me to the base of a low but rocky ridge composed of dark, almost black stones. Here, among a chaotic jumble of huge boulders overgrown with moss and ferns, gaped the maw of a cave, a narrow, irregularly shaped opening in the rock. That strong, nauseating odor, which I had vaguely sensed before, now became almost unbearable. It literally assaulted my nose, triggering gagging reflexes. It was a disgusting mix of decaying flesh, damp, stagnant earth, wet fur, and something else. Animalistic, primal, that made the hair on my body stand on end. There was no doubt. This was it. The beast's lair. Gathering all my willpower, trying to breathe through my mouth, I flicked on my powerful flashlight, and gripping my rifle tighter, stepped into the darkness of the cave. A narrow, winding passage, barely allowing me to walk without stooping, gradually led downwards, deep into the rock. The walls of this passage were covered with strange, crude, almost childish drawings made, it seemed to me, with a charred stick or a piece of red ochre. They depicted ugly, disproportionate human figures with arms raised, huge, emaciated wolves with burning eyes, a full moon ominously hanging over the forest, scenes of bloody hunts, and some incomprehensible, horrifying rituals. These were clearly not ancient cave paintings by primitive humans, nor modern graffiti. Their primitive yet somehow purposeful cruelty caused a deep, irrational unease. Moving deeper and deeper into this foul dungeon, I noticed an inscription on one of the walls, roughly at eye level. It was written in something dark, sticky, resembling congealed blood. In crude, shaky letters, as if written with fading strength, a single, yet no less terrifying word was scrawled in English. Run. My breath hitched. Who had written this? One of the previous victims, trying in their last moments to warn those who would follow. Or was it some diabolical game of the creature itself, a taunt to those who dared enter its domain? The cave passage suddenly widened, opening into a fairly large, irregularly shaped chamber, its ceiling lost somewhere in the darkness. The stench here was simply unbearable. My flashlight beam, sweeping across the walls, picked out horrifying details from the gloom. Piles of gnawed bones, human and animal, mixed together, scraps of clothing, decayed backpacks, broken camping gear. I realized this was a true graveyard, a mass grave for all those unfortunates who had the ill luck to meet the master of this cave. And then, from the very depths of this reeking chamber, I heard them. Quiet but distinct munching sounds, and a low, guttural growl that sent an icy shiver down my spine. I had found it. I had found this spawn of hell. I froze, like a mouse under a broom, trying not to make a single sound, even holding my breath. In the deepest part of this cave chamber, illuminated only by the faint, flickering reflection of my flashlight off the wet, slick walls, the huge, dark figure of the werewolf was hunched over something sprawled on the floor. The creature ravenously tore at still warm flesh with its claws and teeth, making repulsive, guttural, slurping sounds that turned my stomach. Looking closer, I realized with horror that these were human remains. Judging by the remnants of a bright red backpack and scraps of a blue nylon jacket, it was some unwary tourist who had wandered too far into these cursed places. The smell of fresh blood, mixed with the stale stench of decay and rot, became so unbearable that a nauseating lump rose in my throat. The creature was completely engrossed in its monstrous meal and seemed utterly unaware of my presence. This gave me a small but precious chance. Slowly, step by step, trying not to tread on the treacherously crunching small bones underfoot, I began to back away, towards the narrower passage that led into this chamber of death. With trembling, clumsy hands, I pulled out the pre-prepared plastic explosive blocks from my backpack. It was a small, illegal stash I'd held onto from my old logging days, a remnant of a time when some less than scrupulous operators had used unsanctioned methods for clearing tough log jams. I'd never thought I'd need it again, let alone for this. Each block had an electric detonator attached, and a small remote control lay in my jacket pocket. Carefully, trying not to make a sound, I placed several charges along the walls of the narrow passage, where it narrowed slightly, creating a kind of deadly funnel. If the beast chased me, it would be right at the epicenter. Having completed the wiring, I took up a position a little further back, behind a large rock outcropping that could serve as some cover. I raised my rifle, carefully aimed at the dark silhouette still gnawing at its prey. My heart pounded like crazy in my chest. Adrenaline surged through my blood, lending a feverish precision to my movements. I took a deep, ragged breath and smoothly squeezed the trigger. The silver bullet, specially cast for this occasion, shrieked out of the barrel. I clearly saw it hit the werewolf squarely in the head, just above its right eye, tearing off part of its ear and leaving a smoking, charred wound on its dark fur. The werewolf let out a deafening roar full of unbearable pain and primal rage which seemed to shake the very cave walls, sending small stones raining down from the ceiling. It instantly forgot its interrupted meal. Its huge, yellow eyes, burning with a demonic fire, immediately found me in the gloom. The creature sprang sideways with an incredible leap, its movements swift and deadly as a lightning strike. I managed to get off a few more snapshots. The bullets hit its massive torso and one of its front paws, but it seemed not to notice. Roaring even louder, it lunged at me. Seeing this killing machine hurtling towards me, I knew I had no time to think. I didn't wait for it to close the distance between us. Turning, I bolted for the exit of the chamber, counting the seconds in my head. 3, 2, 1. As I burst into the narrow passage, I pressed the button on the remote control. A deafening, ground-shaking explosion erupted. The cave was instantly filled with acrid smoke, dust, and the roar of collapsing rocks. I myself was thrown against the wall by the blast wave, but I managed to brace myself and cover my head with my arms. Staggering to my feet, coughing from the dust and smoke, I emerged from the smoky chamber and took up a position at the very entrance of the cave, ready to finish off the wounded, dazed beast. I was sure such an explosion would leave nothing but a wet spot. But after several agonizingly long moments, the werewolf emerged from the swirling cloud of dust, swaying like a drunkard. It was covered in blood, and its dark, matted hide showed numerous ragged wounds from rock shrapnel. But to my unspeakable horror, I watched as, right before my eyes, the small scratches and cuts on its body began to close. The bleeding from them stopped, and the steam rising from the wounds grew thicker. The ear torn off by the explosion, however, did not regrow, and one of its front paws was unnaturally twisted and dragged limply on the ground. The werewolf, spotting me again, let out a furious roar filled with pain and hatred, and limping on 3 legs, charged again. I unleashed a barrage of fire from my rifle, aiming for its remaining limbs and head. One of the bullets seemed to sever its injured paw completely, practically tearing it off. The creature stumbled, roared in pain, but didn't stop. It continued to crawl towards me, dragging its mangled body, its eyes burning with hellfire. I fired again and again until the magazine was empty, and I understood the terrible truth. This monster could not be killed so easily. Bullets, even silver, even explosives could only slow it down, wound it, but not destroy it. In its eyes, I read an inhuman, unfathomable hatred and an insatiable thirst for my blood. I had no other choice. I had to run to survive. I broke into a dead run, heedless of the path, plunging headlong into the forest, in the direction I thought I'd come from. Behind me, I heard the werewolf's furious roar, filled with pain and the promise of a gruesome death. The creature, despite its severe wounds, a torn ear, a mangled and almost severed paw, numerous shrapnel wounds all over its body, was pursuing me. I ran as fast as I could, leaping over storm-felled trees that now seemed not like obstacles but like protective barriers, tearing through thickets of thorny bushes, utterly ignoring the branches whipping my face and arms, leaving deep, bleeding scratches on my skin. From time to time, when the distance between me and my pursuer increased slightly, I would stop for a few precious seconds to turn around and fire a shot from my pump-action shotgun, which I'd managed to reload while escaping the cave. Large buckshot, including silver-loaded ones, thudded into the creature's massive body, making the werewolf stumble, flinch, and let out a prolonged, tormented howl. But this only delayed it briefly. Moments later, it resumed the chase, moving with a devilish, inhuman determination. I knew I was critically low on ammunition, and every miss could cost me my life. The flashlight, which I'd dropped somewhere near the cave, left me in almost complete darkness. Only stray moonbeams piercing through the dense foliage lit my way. I felt my strength rapidly draining. My lungs burned. Each breath was a struggle. My legs ached with unearthly fatigue, turning into lead weights. But the werewolf, though severely wounded and bleeding, seemed tireless. It was driven only by primal, blind rage and an insatiable thirst for revenge. Its heavy, rasping, gurgling breaths and low, guttural growls sounded closer and closer behind me. I could almost feel its icy breath of death on my neck. The primal fear, the same as that first night, again gripped my heart. The creature was relentlessly gaining on me. I tried to use my knowledge of the forest, my hunting skills, to shake off my pursuer. I weaved through the trees like a rabbit, chose the most difficult terrain, swampy lowlands, dense thickets of young firs, steep ravine slopes, hoping to slow down this killing machine, if only a little. But the werewolf seemed to adapt to any terrain with ease. Its animal instincts, sharpened to the extreme, and its supernatural inhuman strength allowed it to overcome any obstacle that for me became a serious challenge. Hope for salvation dwindled with each passing minute, with each step that brought me closer to inevitable, terrible doom. Beyond the unbearable physical exhaustion, I was increasingly burdened by the oppressive psychological horror of realizing that I had encountered something immeasurably stronger than me, something almost invulnerable to ordinary weapons. Memories of Sarah and Timmy, their laughing faces, their lifeless, mangled bodies, mingled with the horrifying images of the dismembered tourist in the cave, with the image of this relentless, bloodthirsty creature, and all of it fueled my fear, my despair, my hatred. I couldn't let this creature win, couldn't give up, but my strength was failing. My cartridge belt was almost empty. I frantically counted the remaining rounds. There were only a few left. A few last chances for salvation. I had to use them with maximum effectiveness, but how? How to stop this invulnerable killing machine that seemed to feed on my own pain and fear? I frantically looked around, searching for any way out, even the most insane possibility of salvation. And then, quite unexpectedly, I recognized the barely visible, overgrown path I was now running on. I had been here hours ago, following the bloody trail left by the ritual. And I remembered. Here, somewhere very close, literally a few hundred yards to the north, began that grim, ominous part of the forest where I had stumbled upon Bigfoot's tracks and even seen him watching me from the hillside. This thought, flashing in my fevered brain like a bolt of lightning, spawned a crazy, desperate, but perhaps the only correct plan. A plan that could either save me or lead to an even more terrible death. Gathering my last, dwindling strength, I sharply veered off the barely visible path, and without looking where I was going, plunged directly into the part of the forest where, as I remembered, I had previously seen numerous Bigfoot tracks and even the creature itself, watching me from the hillside. I knew this was an incredibly risky move, practically suicidal. I could simply trade one monster for another, perhaps even more dangerous. But I had no other choice. The werewolf was too close. Its heavy breathing was already scorching my back. I began to notice the familiar unsettling signs again. Huge branches broken at an inhuman height, the specific, strong, musky scent that grew more pronounced with each step. There was no doubt I had once again trespassed on Sasquatch territory. Glancing back over my shoulder as I ran, I saw that the werewolf, which had been blindly and furiously hot on my heels, had paused for a fraction of a second, frozen in place, right at the unspoken boundary of this territory. The creature raised its mangled snout high, greedily sniffing the air, its one remaining ear twitching nervously, catching sounds I couldn't hear. In its yellow eyes burning with fire, something akin to uncertainty, to animalistic caution, perhaps even fear, flickered for a moment. But then primal rage and bloodlust took over again. With a low, warning growl, aimed not so much at me as at the unseen master of these domains, the werewolf, without hesitation, continued the chase, invading forbidden ground. And then, from behind a thick tangle of young firs, snapping thick branches like dry matchsticks, a huge, muscular humanoid creature emerged onto the small clearing where I stood frozen, unable to take another step. Bigfoot. It was at least 2 heads taller than the werewolf that had been chasing me. Its powerful body, thickly covered in matted dark brown fur, seemed carved from granite. Its small, deeply set eyes burned with a primal, untamed fury. Sasquatch, with incredible force, pounded its enormous, sledgehammer-like fists against its massive, broad chest several times, letting out another terrifying, vibrating roar. This was a clear, unambiguous challenge to the trespasser on its territory, who had dared not only to enter uninvited, but also to bring another, equally dangerous predator. The werewolf, though noticeably smaller and less powerful than Bigfoot, had no intention of backing down. In its bloodshot eyes, the insatiable thirst for my blood still burned, apparently outweighing its instinct for self-preservation. It snarled furiously and, limping on its mangled paw, lunged at Bigfoot. A furious primal battle of two titans, two nightmarish spawn of this ancient forest, began. Razor-sharp claws tore through thick fur and flesh, huge fangs crunched into taut muscles. The forest filled with deafening roars, furious shrieks, gasps, and the crackling of young trees snapped like kindling as they fell beneath the enraged giants. I, finding temporary cover behind the thick trunk of a storm-felled tree, watched this incredible bloody battle with horror and a twisted primal fascination. Bigfoot, despite the werewolf's ferocious resistance and the wounds it sustained, the werewolf did manage to clamp its jaws onto his shoulder and deeply claw his side, clearly dominated the struggle thanks to its incredible, almost unbelievable physical strength and perhaps better knowledge of this terrain, every rock, every tree. At one point, it managed to seize the werewolf in its enormous hairy hands, lifted it effortlessly like a rag doll, and with monstrous, inhuman strength literally tore its jaw apart. A disgusting crunch of breaking bones echoed. Then, roaring so fiercely that my ears rang, Bigfoot, with one powerful, swift movement, ripped off the werewolf's head. Dark, almost black blood gushed like a fountain, drenching the ground and Bigfoot itself. The headless body of the creature, still twitching in convulsions, fell to the ground with a dull thud. Bigfoot, breathing heavily and bleeding from numerous wounds left by the werewolf's claws and teeth, slowly turned its massive, matted furred head towards me. In its small, dark eyes, there was neither malice nor gratitude. Only the cold, detached, assessing gaze of a creature as ancient as the forest itself. I understood. I was next. I had witnessed what I should not have seen. I had disturbed the peace of this place, sacred to it. Without losing another second, I scrambled to my feet and, feeling no ground beneath me, ran as fast as I ever had in my life, away from that place of bloody, primal slaughter, away from that terrible ancient forest. I ran without looking back, heedless of the path, until my lungs literally threatened to burst from the inhuman exertion. But the primal fear, the fear of what I had just seen, the fear of this mighty, uncontrollable creature gave me some supernatural strength. I didn't know if Bigfoot was pursuing me, but I didn't dare stop to check. I ran until my strength finally gave out, until my legs buckled and I collapsed onto the damp, pine-scented earth somewhere at the very edge of the forest, already far from where the monstrous battle had taken place. The forest around me once again seemed ordinary, familiar, almost peaceful. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in calm, pastel tones. But for me, this forest, and indeed the whole world, would never be the same. Gasping for air with difficulty, I cautiously, overcoming the trembling throughout my body, rose to my feet and looked back towards the dark, ominous thicket. And there, at the very edge of the forest, at the invisible boundary of Bigfoot's territory, I noticed a dark, massive, almost motionless silhouette. The creature stood, swaying slightly, watching me. It was him, Bigfoot. He wasn't pursuing me. It seemed he was simply ensuring that the unwelcome, two-legged stranger had finally left his domain, his sacred ground, Moments later, his massive silhouette slowly swayed and silently dissolved into the thick shadows of the ancient trees, as if he had never been there at all. I walked slowly, as if in a dream, towards home, or rather to what remained of my home. The ruined structure, overgrown with weeds. My revenge was complete. The creature that had so cruelly and mercilessly killed my family, ripped apart my soul, was dead. But I felt no relief. There was no joy, no satisfaction, only an overwhelming, endless emptiness. The crushing sense of loss, the unbearable pain of losing Sarah and little Timmy, had not gone away. They still lived within me, tormenting my heart. My victory felt hollow, bitter like wormwood. I had avenged them, but it didn't bring back those I loved so immensely. It couldn't heal that gaping, bleeding wound in my soul. I couldn't, simply physically couldn't, return to my old normal life. And there was no such life anymore. I sold the remains of our plot with the ruined house for next to nothing to some passing developer who planned to build a motel there. With the small amount of money I got, I bought a tiny, secluded cabin even deeper in the forest, but on a different, quieter, and more populated side, far from those cursed places. After some time, using my extensive knowledge of the forest and survival skills, I got a job as a park ranger in a neighboring national park. I had to be here, close to this forest. It attracted and repelled me simultaneously. It was my curse and my only sanctuary. I never again, under any pretext, ventured into the territory I considered Bigfoot's domain. But often, patrolling the park boundaries, I saw his huge, distinctive tracks on damp ground or in the snow. Sometimes, very rarely, I even caught a fleeting glimpse of his massive, dark figure, flickering in the distance among the trees. Between us, it seemed, a kind of unspoken, silent truce had been established. I didn't bother him, he didn't bother me. Deep down, I understood that Sasquatch had, in essence, saved my life that day and unknowingly helped me exact my revenge, even though he was pursuing only his own incomprehensible goals, the defense of his territory from intruders. I dedicated the rest of my empty and solitary life to guarding this section of the forest. I relentlessly chased off poachers, strictly ensuring that careless tourists didn't venture too far into the wild, untrodden corners where danger might lurk. I became a kind of unofficial guardian of Bigfoot's peace, paying silent homage to this mighty, primeval creature who, unknowingly, had become an unwitting instrument of my retribution and a living symbol of nature's wild, untamed primal force, a force that obeys no human laws. At night, I often sat on the old, creaking porch of my small cabin, rifle across my lap, listening to the endless, mysterious sounds of the night forest. I knew that there, in its dark, unexplored depths, lay secrets that most people didn't even suspect, living in their cozy, safe worlds. And I, one of the few who dared to peer beyond that thin veil of normalcy and survive to tell the tale. My personal war was over, but my vigil, my eternal vigil on the border of worlds, would continue until the very end. In my soul, the cold, unquenchable flame of the tragedy I had endured still burned, but now it was joined by a grim, heavy understanding of the true, terrifying nature of this world, so carefully hidden behind the fragile, deceptive facade of modern civilization.